The massive alien ship hung in Earth's orbit like a dark cloud. Its surface was covered in battle scars from hundreds of wars across the galaxy. Inside, Ravek stood at the observation deck, his tall figure casting a long shadow. His gray skin showed marks of past battles, and his 4 eyes blinked slowly as he looked down at the blue planet. Another primitive world, he said to himself. Ravek had seen 200 worlds fall to the Meridian Empire. Each time, the story was the same. Show force, demand surrender, and add another planet to their growing empire. But today was different. The humans had not run or surrendered when the Meridian fleet appeared. Instead, they had sent a message asking for a meeting. In the Korean Space Force's headquarters in Seoul, Captain Doohan sat at his desk, reading reports about the alien ship. His fingers moved across the screen, studying every detail they had gathered. Unlike many others, he remained calm. 20 years of military service had taught him that panic never helped. "Captain," a voice called. It was Lieutenant Taeyang, walking into the office with a tablet. "The alien ship has accepted our invitation. They're sending their war master to meet us." Doohan nodded. "Good. Prepare the meeting room, and get Officer Kyung-mi here. We need someone who can read their body language." The meeting was set for the next day in the neutral ground of the International Space Station. Doohan watched through the station's windows as the alien shuttle approached. It was smaller than he expected, but its weapons were clear to see. Ravek stepped out of his shuttle, tucking his head under the station's door. He was surprised to see only 3 humans waiting for him. On other worlds, they usually sent armies to such meetings. "Welcome to Earth space," Doohan said, standing straight but relaxed. "I am Captain Doohan of the Korean Space Forces." Ravek looked down at the human. Doohan was much shorter than him, but something in the captain's eyes made Ravek pause. They were not the eyes of someone afraid. "I am War Master Ravek of the Meridian Empire," he said in a deep voice. "I have conquered 200 worlds. I am here to evaluate your military strength." Kyung-mi watched the alien carefully. Despite his boasting, she noticed something in his posture. He was studying them just as much as they were studying him. 200 worlds. Taeyang said with genuine interest. "You must have many stories to tell." Ravek turned all 4 eyes to the lieutenant. "Each conquest is a story of Meridian power. Your world will be another." Doohan smiled slightly. "Perhaps," he said, "we should exchange some stories. We have quite a few of our own." "Stories." Ravek made a sound that might have been a laugh. "What stories could your young species have that would interest a Meridian War Master?" "You might be surprised," Doohan said. "Humanity has fought its share of battles. Not all of them against other worlds, but each one taught us something valuable." Ravek looked at the 3 humans again. They were so calm, so different from other species he had met. Usually, there was fear, or at least worry. But these humans spoke to him as equals. "Very well," Ravek said finally. "Show me what stories humans think can compare to Meridian victories." As they walked to the meeting room, Kyung-mi whispered to Doohan, "He's curious, and maybe a little worried about why we're not afraid." Doohan nodded. "Good, because once he hears our stories, he'll understand why we don't need to be." The meeting room on the space station was simple but comfortable. Ravek had to duck his head under the lights, and the human-sized chair creaked under his weight. Around the table sat the 3 humans, Doohan, Taeyang, and Kyung-mi. "Let me tell you of the Battle of 7 Suns," Ravek began, his deep voice filling the room. The Meridian fleet faced the united forces of an entire star cluster. We were outnumbered 10 to 1. The alien warrior's 4 eyes glowed with pride as he spoke. "We crushed them in 3 days. Our superior technology and tactics left their planets defenseless. They surrendered without conditions." Doohan listened quietly, his hands folded on the table. When Ravek finished, the captain simply nodded. "Impressive. But numbers and technology aren't everything in war." Ravek made a sound like stones grinding together, his version of a laugh. "You speak like someone who has never faced a real army. Your planet has never even left its solar system. Taiyang looked at Duhan, who gave a small nod. The lieutenant cleared his throat. Actually, we learned about war long before we reached space. Would you like to hear about the Battle of Namsen Tower? Ruvek waved one of his large hands. A ground battle. How primitive. But go on. Amused me. Kyung Mai watched carefully as Taiyang began to speak. She noticed how Ruvek's lower eyes narrowed, a sign of attention, despite his dismissive words. It happened during the Resource Wars, Taiyang said. 50 soldiers trapped in the tower. No power, no supplies, enemies all around. They had two choices, surrender or die. They chose death then. Ruvek interrupted, like so many others. No, Duhan said quietly. They chose to survive. Taiyang continued. For 30 days, they held the tower. They made weapons from office furniture. They created a water system from broken pipes. When enemies cut their communications, they used mirrors to flash coded messages to other towers. Ruvek's upper eyes blinked rapidly. Mirrors. Against modern weapons. The enemy had better guns, better armor, everything, Taiyang said. But our soldiers had something else. They had the will to adapt, to think differently, to survive. On day 31, Duhan added, those 50 soldiers walked out of the tower. Not just alive, they had captured 30 enemy soldiers and gathered enough intelligence to turn the tide of the whole war. Ruvek was silent for a long moment. All four of his eyes moved between the three humans. One victory doesn't make a species strong. No, Kyungmei agreed. But it shows you something about humans that your 200 conquests might have missed. And what is that? Ruvek asked, his voice quieter than before. That we don't need to be the strongest to win, Duhan said. We just need to be more determined, more creative, and more willing to adapt than our enemy. Ruvek stood up suddenly, his head brushing the ceiling. I would hear more of these human stories. Kyungmei saw it clearly now, the slight tremor in Ruvek's hands, the way his lower eyes kept focusing on Duhan. The alien warrior was starting to realize that these humans were different from any species he had encountered before. We have many more to share, Duhan said with a small smile. But first, why don't you tell us another of your victories? It's only fair to take turns. Ruvek sat down slowly, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his voice. Very well. But after that, I want to hear how your 50 soldiers made weapons from furniture. After Ruvek finished his story about conquering a water world, Taiyang leaned forward in his chair. His eyes were distant, remembering things he usually tried to forget. Let me tell you about the Mars Colonies War, he said quietly. I was a combat medic back then. Ruvek's 4 eyes focused on the lieutenant. A healer. What could a healer know of war? More than you might think, Taiyang replied. It happened 3 years ago, during the battle for Olympus Base. I was stationed there with 20 other soldiers when the enemy attacked. The alien warrior settled back in his chair, making it creak under his weight. Even Kyungmei and Duhan turned to listen, though they had heard this story before. The first blast hit our main oxygen generators, Taiyang continued. The second took out our communications. We had to retreat to the emergency bunker, 12 wounded soldiers and me. The other 7 went to hold off the enemy. Only 7 defenders. Ruvek interrupted. Against how many attackers? At least 50, Taiyang said. But numbers weren't our biggest problem. We had limited oxygen, no outside help, and 12 people bleeding out in my medical bay. Ruvek's lower eyes blinked rapidly. Then they died. A worthy end in battle. No, Taiyang said firmly. They lived. All of them. The alien warrior's gray skin seemed to pale. Impossible. Without oxygen generators. We had to think differently, Taiyang explained. I taught the wounded who could still move how to make oxygen filters from spare parts. We turned broken medical equipment into air purifiers. Every plant in the hydroponics lab was brought to the bunker to help us breathe. Duhan watched Ravek's reaction carefully. The alien's hands were gripping his chair tightly now. For 15 days, Taeyang went on. We recycled every breath, cleaned every drop of water, and kept everyone alive. The wounded helped each other. Those who couldn't move told stories to keep spirits up. When we ran out of medicine, we found ways to make more from the plants we had. 15 days. Ravek's voice was barely a whisper. In a sealed bunker, with 12 wounded? Kyung-min nodded. It's all in our records, every detail. On day 15, Taeyang said, rescue finally came. All 12 wounded survived. Do you know what they did next? Ravek shook his head slowly. 9 of them went right back to fighting, wounds barely healed. Because that's what humans do. We survive, we adapt, and we keep going. The room was quiet for a long moment. Ravek stood up and walked to the window, staring out at Earth floating below. In all my battles, he said finally, I have never heard of such determination. My people would have given up, accepted death with honor. But you refused to die. That's the difference, Duhan said softly. We don't fight for honor or glory. We fight to live, to protect, to come home. Ravek turned back to them, all 4 eyes showing something new. Respect. You have more stories, he asked. Many more, Kyung-mi answered. But maybe we should take a break. You look like you need time to think. The alien warrior nodded slowly. Yes, I do. Because if this is what your healers can do, I begin to wonder what your warriors are truly capable of. After a short break, they gathered again in the meeting room. Ravek seemed different now, less proud, more thoughtful. He looked at Duhan with all 4 eyes. Tell me your story, Captain, the alien warrior said. What battles have you seen? Duhan was quiet for a moment. I'll tell you about the Battle of Titan, he said finally. It happened 2 years ago, on Saturn's largest moon. Ravek leaned forward. Your people have fought in such harsh conditions. We had a research base there, Duhan explained. 500 scientists and 100 soldiers. We were studying Titan's methane lakes when the pirates attacked. Pirates? Ravek asked. Not a proper army. These weren't simple thieves, Kyung-mi added. They had stolen military ships, top-grade weapons, and they had us outnumbered 3-1. Duhan continued. They thought Titan's harsh environment would help them. The thick atmosphere, the lakes of liquid methane, the extreme cold. They expected us to hide in our base. A sensible strategy, Ravek said. Defend until help arrives. No, Duhan smiled slightly. We didn't hide. We used Titan itself as a weapon. Ravek's lower eyes blinked in confusion. Used the moon as a weapon. The pirates had better ships and guns, Duhan said, but they didn't understand Titan like we did. They didn't know how to move in its gravity, how to navigate its thick atmosphere. And most importantly, they didn't know about our secret project. Taeyang grinned, knowing what was coming next. We had been testing methane-powered engines, Duhan explained. Special suits that could swim in the liquid methane lakes. The pirates thought those lakes would trap us. Instead, they gave us the perfect advantage. You fought in liquid methane. Ravek's voice was filled with disbelief. Our soldiers used the suits to move under the lakes, Duhan said. We planted charges on the lake beds. When the pirates landed their forces, thinking they had us cornered, you ignited the methane. Ravek finished, his voice barely a whisper. Only small, controlled bursts. Duhan nodded. Enough to create chaos in their ranks. While they panicked, our teams emerged from the lakes behind them. The battle was over in hours. Ravek stood up and paced the room. Your soldiers swam through liquid methane, in temperatures that would freeze blood, just to gain tactical advantage. To protect the scientists, Duhan corrected. To defend our people. The harsh conditions didn't matter. We adapted and found a way. The alien warrior stopped pacing. In all my battles, across 200 worlds, I have never. He paused. We Meridians pride ourselves on overwhelming force, superior numbers, better weapons. But you humans, you turn everything into a weapon, even a hostile moon itself. That's because we learned long ago, Kyung Mai said softly, that it's not the size of your army or the power of your weapons that wins wars. It's the ability to think differently, to adapt, to use whatever you have. Ravek sat down heavily. I begin to understand why your people didn't fear our arrival, he said. You've faced worse odds before, and won. Would you like to hear more? Taeyang asked. The alien warrior nodded slowly. Yes, but first, tell me more about these methane suits. How did your people even think to create such things? Kyung Mai had been quiet for most of the meeting, watching Ravek's reactions. Now it was her turn to speak. The alien warrior turned all four eyes to her, waiting. Let me tell you about the Neptune Ring conflict, she said. It's not a story of direct combat like the others. It's about a different kind of warfare. What other kind is there? Ravek asked, genuinely curious now. The kind that happens in the mind. Kyung Mai explained. I was part of the defense team at the Neptune mining station. The enemy was clever. They had better ships, better weapons. But we had something they didn't expect. Do-han and Taeyang exchanged knowing looks. They knew this story well. The enemy ships surrounded us. Kyung Mai continued. They thought they had us trapped. 3,000 miners and station workers, all helpless, or so they believed. Ravek's lower eyes narrowed. You had hidden weapons. No, Kyung Mai smiled. We had knowledge. You see, the Neptune Ring conflict taught us that fear can be a weapon, but not in the way you might think. She pulled up a holographic map of Neptune's rings. The enemy didn't know that every miner on that station had trained for emergencies. Every worker knew how to survive in space. We turned off all station lights, powered down everything. You played dead, Ravek asked, confused. Better, Kyung Mai said. We scattered. 3,000 people in mining suits, hiding in Neptune's rings. The enemy couldn't tell which were people and which were just ice chunks. Understanding began to show in Ravek's eyes. They couldn't shoot everything. Exactly, Kyung Mai nodded. Every time they scanned the rings, we moved. Every time they thought they found us, we were somewhere else. We used the ice, the darkness, the confusion. Their soldiers became nervous, jumpy. Psychological warfare, Ravek said softly. The enemy soldiers started seeing things that weren't there. They'd wasted ammunition shooting at ice. Their commanders couldn't control them anymore. And that's when we struck. Ravek leaned forward. How? We had spent days placing small engines on ice chunks. When the enemy was at their most confused, we activated them all at once. Thousands of ice pieces moving in different directions. In the chaos, our small defense fleet attacked. The enemy fleet was 10 times larger, Du-Han added. But size doesn't matter when your soldiers are too scared to fight properly. Kyung Mai finished. They retreated in panic. A mining station with minimal weapons defeated a battle fleet. Not with guns, but with fear and clever thinking. Ravek stood up and walked to the window again. His hands were shaking slightly. My people, he said slowly, we would never think to fight this way. We believe in direct combat, honorable battle. There's no honor in needless death, Kyung Mai said gently. We fight to survive, to protect. We use whatever works, whether it's methane lakes, mining suits, or the power of fear itself. The alien warrior turned back to them. I understand now why the Empire's usual tactics wouldn't work here. You humans, you don't just fight with weapons. You fight with your minds, with everything you have. That's what makes us dangerous, Du-Han said quietly. Not our weapons or our numbers, but our ability to turn anything into an advantage. Ravek sat down heavily. Tell me more, he said, but his voice was different now. It wasn't a command anymore. It was a request. More humans had joined the meeting now. 3 veteran soldiers sat around the table, each ready to share their stories. Ravek's confident posture was gone. He looked smaller somehow, despite his large size. The first veteran, Captain Ejin, spoke about the Europa ice tunnels. "We were trapped under 3 miles of ice," she said. "Our drilling machines were broken. The enemy above thought we would freeze or starve." Ravek watched her with all 4 eyes. "How did you survive?" "We built new machines," Yijin said simply. "Used parts from our broken vehicles, melted ice for water, grew food in portable labs. It took us 2 months to dig out, but we did it. And when we emerged, the enemy wasn't ready for us." The alien warrior's hands gripped his chair tightly. 2 months under ice. The second veteran, Major Daho, told his story next. "My team was stranded on Mercury's dark side. No power, no heat, no rescue coming. The enemy thought the cold would kill us. But it didn't," Ravek said, already knowing where this was going. "No," Daho smiled. "We walked 500 miles across Mercury's dark side, using our suit heat to stay alive. When we reached the light side, we stole an enemy ship and went home." Ravek's gray skin had turned almost white. "You walked across Mercury." The third veteran, Lieutenant Sunmai, spoke last. "My story is from the Venus Cloud Cities," she said. "When acid storms destroy our floating platforms, we didn't die. We built new ones from wreckage. Lived in the clouds for 6 weeks until help came." Each story hit Ravek like a physical blow. He stood up suddenly, his chair falling backward. "Stop," he said, his voice shaking. I need to understand something." Everyone in the room went quiet. "Every story," Ravek continued, "every single one. You should have died. In space, under ice, in acid clouds, on burning planets. Any normal species would have accepted death. But you humans, you just refused to die." Duhan nodded slowly. "That's right." "How?" Ravek asked, and for the first time, there was fear in his voice. "How can you keep fighting when everything is lost? When death is certain?" Kyung Mai stood up. "Because we don't believe in certain death," she said softly. "Where you see an ending, we see a challenge. Where you see impossible odds, we see a puzzle to solve. This is why we're telling you these stories," Taeyang added. "Not to scare you, but to help you understand. Humanity doesn't win because we're stronger or better armed. We win," Duhan finished, "because we never learn when to quit. We adapt, we survive, we keep fighting. Not for glory or honor, but for life itself." Ravek picked up his chair and sat down again. His hands were still shaking. "In all my years of war," he said quietly, "I have never felt fear like this. Not of your weapons or your armies, but of your endless will to survive." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Ravek looked at them all with new eyes. "I think," he said slowly, "I need to send a very important message to my empire about why starting a war with humans would be unwise." Duhan smiled slightly. "Would you like to hear more stories first?" Ravek shook his head quickly. "No, no more stories. I have heard enough to understand that humans are not like any species we have ever faced. You are something different, something that cannot be conquered by normal means." The meeting room was quiet now. Most of the veterans had left, leaving only Duhan, Taeyang, Kyungme, and Ravek. The alien warrior sat slumped in his chair, looking tired and troubled. "I must tell you something," Ravek said finally. "Something about the Meridian Empire that we never share with other species." The 3 humans waited patiently as Ravek gathered his thoughts. "Our 200 victories," he continued, "they were not like your battles. We won because we always had more ships, better weapons, stronger armies. We never," he paused, "we never had to face what your people have faced." Duhan leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" The Meridian Empire has never lost a war, Ravek said, because we never fight unless we are certain to win. We gather overwhelming force. We strike hard and fast. If we meet strong resistance, we retreat and return with more ships, more soldiers. Kyung Mai watched as all four of Ravek's eyes looked down at his hands. You're saying you've never fought a battle where you were the weaker side? Never, Ravek admitted. It is not our way. We believe that only fools fight when victory is not certain. He looked up at them. But you humans, you fight even when defeat seems sure. And somehow, you win. Taeyang nodded slowly. Because we've learned that certain defeat isn't always certain. In all my years as a warrior, Ravek continued, I have never had to swim through liquid methane. Never had to survive under miles of ice. Never had to walk across a planet's dark side. His voice grew quieter. I have never faced such challenges because we always made sure we had the upper hand. Duhan studied the alien warrior carefully. And now you're wondering what would happen if your empire faced an enemy that doesn't give up. Yes, Ravek said simply. Your stories, they frighten me. Not because of the battles themselves, but because they show that humans cannot be defeated in the usual way. You turn death traps into weapons. You survive what should not be survivable. He stood up and walked to the window again, staring at Earth. I must tell my empire the truth. That all our victories, all our power, mean nothing against a species that treats impossible situations as mere challenges to overcome. What will your leaders say? Kyung Mai asked. They will not want to believe it, Ravek said. They will say I am exaggerating, that no species could be this adaptable. He turned back to them. But I know what I have heard today. I know what you humans are capable of. And what is that? Duhan asked quietly. You are the most dangerous kind of enemy, Ravek said. One that grows stronger from defeat. One that learns from every failure. One that sees opportunity where others see only death. He shook his head slowly. The Empire has never faced such an enemy. We don't know how to fight a species that refuses to accept defeat. Taeyang smiled slightly. Maybe you don't have to fight us at all. Ravek looked at him with all four eyes. No, he said softly. Perhaps we don't. Perhaps there are things the Meridian Empire could learn from humans. About survival. About adaptation. About never giving up. 2 weeks had passed since the first meeting on the space station. Ravek stood before the Meridian High Council, his tall figure casting a long shadow in the grand chamber. The walls were covered with pictures of past victories, but they seemed less impressive to him now. You cannot be serious, one council member said. His 6 eyes all blinked at once. These humans survived all these things. Every word is true, Ravek said firmly. I have seen their records. Talk to their warriors. These humans, they are different from any species we have met. The council chamber buzzed with worried whispers. Ravek continued speaking, his voice stronger now. The humans have given me permission to share their stories with our people, he said. They want us to understand them better. And after hearing these stories, many of our warriors are troubled. The head council member leaned forward. Troubled? Why? Because, Ravek explained, our warriors now realize that all our victories came from having better weapons and more ships. We never learned to fight when we were weaker. Never had to survive against impossible odds. He pressed a button, and a hologram appeared. It showed the methane lakes of Titan, the ice tunnels of Europa, the dark side of Mercury. Humans have fought and survived in all these places, Ravek said. Not with superior weapons or numbers, but with what they call human spirit. They adapt. They think in ways we cannot imagine. Another council member spoke up. But surely our fleet could still. No, Ravek cut him off. You don't understand. If we attack with 10 ships, they will find a way to win with 1. If we trap them on a frozen moon, they will build shelters from wreckage. If we cut off their supplies, they will make their own. The chamber went quiet. Ravek looked at each council member in turn. Our warriors are asking to learn from humans, he said, not about weapons or tactics, but about their way of thinking, about never giving up, about turning weakness into strength. The head council members stood up slowly. You were sent to evaluate if we should conquer Earth, he said. Instead, you returned suggesting we should learn from them. Yes, Ravek said simply, because if we fight them, we will lose, not because they are stronger, but because they do not know how to be defeated. He paused. But if we learn from them, our empire could become truly great. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some warriors who had heard Ravek's stories stood up to support him. Others argued against this strange new idea. But Ravek noticed something important. None of them talked about conquering Earth anymore. The stories had done their work. The Meridian Empire was changing. Back on the space station, Duhan received a message from Ravek. He read it with a small smile. The council is sending teachers, he told Taiyang and Kyungme. They want to learn how humans think, how we solve problems, how we survive, and what do they offer in return? Kyungme asked. Their technology, their knowledge of space. Duhan looked out at the stars. Ravek says they want to learn courage from us, and they will teach us to reach the stars in return. Taiyang grinned. Sounds like a good trade. Should we tell them more stories? Oh yes, Duhan nodded. We have many more stories to share. And now, they're finally ready to listen. 1 month later, Ravek walked through the Korean Space Force's training center with Duhan. The alien warrior looked different now. He moved with less pride but more purpose. His battle armor had been replaced with the simple clothes of a student. Your training methods are strange to us, Ravek said, watching human soldiers practice in a simulation room. We always trained with the best equipment. You train with nothing, then make do with whatever you have. Duhan nodded. Because in real battle, you never know what you'll have to work with. They stopped at a window where Meridian warriors were learning alongside human soldiers. The aliens were struggling to build a shelter using only broken parts and tools. 6 weeks ago, I would have called this training pointless, Ravek said. Now I understand. Every challenge makes us stronger. Every failure teaches us something new. You're learning quickly, Duhan replied. Your warriors are starting to think differently. They walked to the next training area, where Kyungme was teaching a class about human history. Both humans and Meridians sat together, listening to stories about past battles and survival. I have been reading your history books, Ravek said quietly. So many stories of humans facing death, yet choosing to live. It makes our victories seem empty. Not empty, Duhan corrected him. Just different. You built an empire on strength. Now you're learning to build one on resilience. Taiyang joined them, carrying new training plans. The Meridian students are doing well, he reported. Yesterday, they managed to survive the ice planet simulation. Last week, none of them thought it was possible. Ravek's 4 eyes showed pride, but it was different from his old pride. They are learning that impossible is just another word for not yet solved. They walked outside, looking up at the stars. A Meridian ship hung in orbit next to human satellites, no longer a threat but a symbol of cooperation. My people have changed, Ravek said. In just 1 month, we have learned more about true strength than in all our centuries of conquest. And it started with stories, with your stories. Stories can be powerful teachers, Kyungme said, joining them. They show us what's possible. Ravek turned to them. I must tell you something. A High Council has given me a new title. I am no longer War Master. He paused. They have made me first teacher of human ways. Duhan smiled. A good choice. You understand both sides now. Yes, Ravek agreed. I understand that true power isn't in having the strongest weapons or the biggest fleet. It's in here. He touched his chest. In never giving up. In finding ways to survive. In helping each other grow stronger. They watched as more Meridian ships arrived, bringing not weapons but students and teachers. The exchange of knowledge had begun. What happens next? Taeyang asked. We learn from each other, Duhan said. Humans teach the Meridians about survival and adaptation. They teach us about the stars and space travel. Together, we become something new. Ravek looked at his human friends. And to think, it all started because you shared your battle stories with a proud alien who thought he knew everything about war. Sometimes, Kyung Mai said with a smile, the best way to prevent a war is to help your enemy understand you. Not enemies, Ravek corrected, not anymore. Now we are students, teachers, and friends. The stars shone above them, no longer a battlefield, but a frontier to explore together. Human determination and Meridian technology would take them far. But more importantly, they had learned that the greatest victories don't come from fighting wars, but from learning to understand each other.